Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Digital Experiences Using a Conversational Interface. I'm Bruce Posner, Senior Editor of MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. This event will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the end of this live event. In addition, today's slides will be made available to attendees. We welcome your questions for our speaker today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in the chat box in the lower corner of your screen. Or you can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag MIT SMR event. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If you're having audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead, or check the help link in the upper part of your console. In the question box, yeah. Okay. So make questions. Excuse me. Our speaker today is Bala Iyer, Dean of Faculty and Professor of Technology, Operations, and Information Management at Babson College. Our thanks go out to Bold 360 by LogMeIn for their sponsorship of this webinar. And now on to our presentation, Digital Experiences Using a Conversational Interface. Bala, tell us about your research in this area of customer experience.
Thank you, Bruce, and welcome everybody. This research that I have worked on started with a couple of years ago with colleagues Jerry Kane at Boston College and Andrew Burgett, who's an investor and a venture capitalist in the Bay Area. So the findings are what I'm going to list here in this presentation. And my Twitter handle can be found here in case you want to follow some issues around technology and strategy. I mainly tweet about those and a little bit about the Patriots from time to time. Okay, let me just set the expectation here on what kind of conversation we're going to have here. So we have now in the digital transformation era, everything is getting connected. And in the process of getting connected, expectations have also changed as to what to expect as you interact with companies. So I'm going to be talking about conversational interfaces in commerce, but more from a strategic perspective. I want to set the stage for why is this important to understand from a strategic perspective. And I will also talk about some examples of how companies are using it and what are some lessons learned in the process. So the key thing now today is that every company is trying to use technology to build and manage and deliver unique experiences for customers and build that in a very consistent manner across every touch point. So as a result, we are talking about digital experiences. So this means that we have to pay attention to every aspect of product lifecycle. And also we got to be looking at every interaction as an opportunity. So the core ideas are 4 things that you have to take away from this. One, using this concept we're going to talk about today, how do companies automate some of their interactions and learn from every interaction? This is a key goal for companies. And you'll see to a large extent, we'll talk about engagement. Stakeholder engagement is very important. And we are going to talk about customer engagement, particularly in this conversation. The other expectation is that these conversational interfaces give companies the opportunity to create innovative business models. And finally, and this is a key concept with any digital initiative, is you become part of multiple ecosystems, and I refer to them as dynamic ecosystems. We'll get through these concepts through examples as we proceed. So here are the trends that allow us to do the things that we just talked about. When you try to do a startup, or if an established company is trying to add new value, you don't try to build everything yourself today. You borrow some things from others who've done it. For example, Amazon has done a great job with AWS, where you can get a lot of the services from AWS. But there'll be a time soon where every company will be looking in out, so that if they're very good at something, they'll offer that as a service. Collecting data is going to become standard, and then the same data will be used in different business contexts to get different business value out of it. And Warren Buffett talks about building moats. Data is going to be the new moat. And the data we are talking about is not just the customer data, which we are doing very well collecting today, but also how people use the products and services that you sell. And we refer to that as product in use data. The other trend that we're seeing today is what I refer to as ambient user interfaces. What I mean by that is if you look at kids in high school today, if they see a text underlined, they click on it because they expect that to be a hypertext link. Similarly, very soon, people expect every object and every device to understand instructions that we have them do something. So the user interface would be ambient, and you can just talk to things. That's going to be an expectation. And finally, what does this mean for strategy? Today, when you think about an Apple product or Amazon, there are some things they have investments they have made. It makes it very easy for us to interact with their products and services. And we also know that we have some expectations. If you pull out an Apple device, immediately you can make it work. It connects to things pretty quickly, understands that things have to be connected for it to work, and out of the box, you're able to do that. And they have created some expectations around digital experience. It's not just Apple. I refer to these companies that are setting the trend today as digital titans. Just as we learned in the earlier era about business and how to compete from automotive companies, now it's the time of the digital titans to teach us how to compete. So examples of them are Apple, Amazon, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba. You can see them to the right. And the picture you see, the graphic you see, is about each one of them and their interconnections. They also collaborate as they compete. So this is a representation of that. These are all multi-billion-dollar companies, as you all know, and they have what I refer to as platform-based models. And they are the ones who are experts at creating digital experiences. They are setting the trend in that. And they have also shown us what it means to own these data assets. And they've taken these data assets into different domains, which has led to other issues because now they have a competitive advantage over new entrants and even incumbents when they enter the new businesses because of the data they have from other settings that they brought in. And essentially, they're becoming multi-purpose platforms that present a threat to companies in every sector. But there are a few key concepts you learned from them. There are many, but I'll highlight a few for the purposes of this conversation. They have introduced this concept of a digital customer. What I mean by that is today when you interact with smart products, by a smart product, what I mean is products that have built-in sensors and ability to process information. When you interact with these smart products, you generate information during every use. A digital customer is somebody who's willing to share this information that's generated. When you drive a car, there's a lot of information that's generated about yourself, how you drive the car, and even the location where you are, the environment that is around you. A digital customer is willing to share that information with the provider, and that exchange is favorable to both. When this concept is used effectively, companies can build that data moat that I was talking about, which is information assets. And the same data that you're collecting can be used to make the products better. So every interaction is not just about serving customers and telling them in some future release, I can create a better product for you, but actually right then and there to improve the product or service they're providing. So it's almost instant value is provided. And that's going to be the expectation. The other concept that's important and that's evolving today, and there are articles about this in the Sloan Management Review, is the concept of digital replica. So when this data that's being collected is used to build a digital version of the product or the customer that you're serving, that's referred to as a digital replica. So for example, in the case of GE, they build digital replicas of the turbines that are there in the aircrafts. And they're able to track it and monitor it real time and know about problems or challenges that will occur in real time and take actions to prevent anything bad from happening. So these replicas that companies own through the data will allow them to provide monitoring services, predictive maintenance services, in fact, move to more outcome-based services with their products and services. If you look at a digital replica, here are things that go into it. First of all, you should understand if it's a product, what is the physics and mechanics that's behind the product so that you can build a digital version of it. You collect event-based data around the enterprise, which is a classic database management system does. You collect customer data, which we're all doing today. But I think the new thing that you're collecting is how products are getting used. So if you're a driver of a car and you drive within the speed limits and you are not riding the brakes all the time, you're not speeding, and all those things can be recorded. Also, data about the context where the car is operating can also be collected. And while the customer's driving, the passenger's driving in the car, you could even get physiological information about this person.
What do you think are the top uses for a digital replica? We'll give you a couple seconds to fill out the poll. We'll have those results in a second. Bala, do you have some thoughts on what are people just getting used to this whole idea, or?
I think in different shapes and forms, people are getting used to this idea. It's been around for a while, but pulling it all together is what's happening, which is end-to-end connecting the ideas of product in use to actual design of products. That is finally coming together thanks to technology. Okay, so let me move on. I think it was during the F8 conference that Mark Zuckerberg captured the moment by saying that the new generation of customers actually want to interact with brands also, just like we talked about us clicking the underlying text. They would like to interact with brand just like they're interacting with any other person, a friend. So this is what brought us into the world of chatbots. And then we'll connect it to other such issues. So these are simply programs that you can use natural language to interact with companies. And the key point to remember is it's not magic, because they have to have data sources to help answer these questions, and we'll make the connection again clear as we move along. I like to look at the tech industry from the perspective of stacks.
Yeah.
Right?
So we have another poll here.
Okay.
This is the one about asking our attendees whether they are currently using chatbots. Are
Yes.
you currently using a chatbot? We'll give you a couple seconds to answer here. Okay, so looks like the largest 41% are saying no, and 29% are currently using chatbots, and the rest are considering using them. How does that jive with your expectation?
That's around which I was expecting. I'll tell you reasons to support both the yes and no's in just as we move along, why it makes sense. There is reason to be cautious about it, and there are also reasons to adopt it. So I think that makes sense. So one way to look at this is, with most technologies, look at it as a stack, and I'll explain what that means. So if you look at UI design, it has evolved from back in the day when you actually punched in commands, either at the DOS prompt or even through Linux, how you interacted with the operating system, to more of the graphical user interface, where it was mouse and point and click, and web interface became standard. Then apps became the next one. I think the next layer is the conversational layer. They actually talk to programs or objects, and they may actually end up invoking an app and getting the task done. Ultimately, we want the computer to do tasks for you, and the more it becomes natural, the higher difficulty in processing the requests, and the more it becomes command-driven, the more difficult it is for the humans to write queries to the computer, because you have to learn the computer language. So either the computer gets to learn more about us, or we got to learn about how to talk to computers. So it's one way or the other. Within the chatbots, I just want to give you a simple structure, because this is important for us as we look at the lessons learned. So if you take the chatbot interface, that's where you type in your requests. And the way this works is the chatbot request and the chatbot functioning has to be embedded within things that you already use. There's this expression that is app fatigue, that using too many of these apps is already causing challenges for people, and they end up using only a very select few, then downloading everything that shows up. So if we add another interface for chatbots, it's going to be very expensive to get people to adopt. So one strategy that's been taken is that companies are using the existing channels you use for messaging and building chatbots within those channels. So that's one aspect of it. The other thing is, within chatbots, there's a heavy dependence on artificial intelligence engines, because what separates these things from a traditional database, and you might query the traditional database through SQL, is your ability to use natural language, and that's where you need artificial intelligence engines. Particularly natural language processing tools are very important here. You need apps, third-party services like apps, and even third-party data sources for this value proposition to work. But the key thing that goes on within the company is you build a set of databases and domain knowledge. So when you look at a chatbot, you could get some domain knowledge from the provider about, let's say, if you're building a bot for financial services and banks, the service provider could give you some domain knowledge around that. And by the way, as you start using the chatbot in your business, you can add more to it. And computers still don't have common sense. So there has to be some engine for general knowledge. And then you got to collect both the customer data and contextual data that's available to you during the interactions that you provide. So as you introduce chatbots, you also have to think about the various sources for knowledge and the data you're collecting. And remember, the bet is that you can use that data to look for other opportunities with other businesses, and you can use that interface to build very unique experiences for the customers. But in order to deliver on that, you need these third-party service providers. But then the third-party service providers cannot give you all these types of knowledge we're talking about. So you have to figure out what you own and what you can get from third parties. So in general, when you talk about stacks, and this is not anything to do with conversational layers, but in general with stacks, there are many layers. And the reason why this layer logic is important is, from a strategic perspective, firms can choose to dominate one layer. For example, if you decide to dominate the conversation layer or the app layer, you can pick one of those. But in general, layers closer to the customer are more valued because that's where you get the most customer data. So you want to move up layers if you can. The other thing that can happen is, as you move up layer, you also have the ability to commoditize layers below by actually providing some of the lower layer services or making that as not so relevant. So game is moving up the stack. But getting up the stack is also getting to be challenging now because of the expectation that you're going to have, as they call it, more humanity in the exchange. So computers need to understand humans more. So it's easier said than done that you move closer to the customer, because then you got to take other considerations have to be put in there, as we'll talk about. So here are some popular messaging apps, and most of the adoption have gone into the billions. And that's why they have become relevant. The messaging as the platform that people have picked because of the adoption there. And then what does it mean to have conversational commerce? So for example, if messaging apps are popular, then conversational interfaces allow people to use the natural language to talk to these programs. So we use apps like Facebook Messenger, WeChat, and Talk. And this conversational commerce, the phrase was coined by Chris Messina. And I think the only thing I would like to add to that is AI has become very important in making this happen. I think there was a question. Let me just look at what the question was. Okay, yeah, this could be referred to as the new stack. And by the way, you have to keep close track of the computing stack as it evolves, because you could introduce new layers or new layers could get introduced. And the implications for your own business, you have to judge after a layer is introduced. Now, the question is whether the conversation layer is going to be adopted wildly. That's the challenge to figure out. As our poll said, 41% are not ready for it. 29% are looking at it. As the adoption gets higher, it becomes a legitimate layer in the computing stack. The global chatbot market prediction is that it's going to be 834 million. But if you look at the investment, it's much higher, 24 billion. That's because it's an ecosystem and you have to invest in other aspects of that ecosystem. When we refer to a bot, it's not one type. There are many, many types of bots. And I won't go through them all, but you could have it for as a personal assistant. I think there's one I use all the time for looking for restaurants, for news, help desk, product selection, and even individual branding. So it's not, bot is not just one thing. There's several types of bots out there. Here's some cautions. There's a study where people, 63% said that they would use these. I think our data was a little bit lower, but 63% agree that they would use these bots. But then they also find it quite creepy if bots behave too much like humans. But the big takeaway for me is people like to know whether they're interacting with real live person or a bot. And then they also want to be assured that the bot is not able to handle their questions, that there is a human intervention available for that. So this is a very interesting takeaway from this study. Also, there was another study by information.com that said they only understand 30% of the requests. And there's a reason for this, because bots cannot be general purpose engines. Because natural language processing and AI has not reached to a point where any query can be understood. We still have to have narrow intelligence to do this. We'll talk more about it. And then 55% said that the accuracy and understanding was not there. So here's the challenge, right? So users expect a highly personalized, almost like a real human interaction with bots. But the technology, it's my belief that the technology is not there to deliver that. And that's why that data which said that only 30% of the requests could be actually understood makes sense. So for very structured tasks, like ordering a pizza, it works. But for the rest, there's still challenges that are out there. So what are some of the things that one have to look for before you seriously proceed with this? You should have clear reason to adopt this. You have to pick an area, process, where you know that you will find some results. You have to pick a platform, and I give you a list of platforms at the end of stock that you have to use to pick the initial development. And based on the architecture, you got to remember that it's better to own some of the data and engines that you use. And you also want to be able to deploy across multiple messaging platforms. And the key thing is, this is like any other platform, and adoption metrics within platforms matter. And the same thing here. So when you pick a platform, number of users on it, developers on it, those things matter, just like other platforms. And finally, you got to have the ability to create personas or more human-like interfaces, and it's important to look for that in the platform. Here's a picture of an ecosystem for bots that I drew based on the currently available data. There are about 500 companies on this list and close to 500 relationships. So if a bot platform works with Messenger, then there is a link between them. So this is the entire network of the bot ecosystem as of 2 days ago. And the individual company names, all 500 of them, I will provide this as a list in a spreadsheet. and you can take a look at them later. But the takeaway here is that subsystems are coalescing around Google Assistant, Facebook Messenger, and interestingly, through an AI provider, also Recast, Cortana, and others there. So that's expected. But what one needs to look for key players are those that connect multiple of these subsystems. For example, Alexa is occupying a key position here. Nest is occupying a key position. Harman Kardon is occupying a key position. Smooch, which is another platform provider, is able to work both across Facebook Messenger and Google Assistant and has an interesting position. And if you look right smack in the middle, you see Slack. Slack seems to be in the middle of the action within the bot providers, which is very interesting to note. So those are the key players within the ecosystem, and you should keep tracking this over time so that you understand who the key players are. And like I said, the list of companies in this ecosystem, I will provide that list to you all, and I think you'll get an email later on how to download it. So I'll rush through these because smartphone adoptions are going up, and also the number of people who use messaging apps are going up. So these two have become like the de facto operating systems now. And the current generation of consumers don't want to leave these apps or platforms, and they want to conduct both their conversations and commerce through the same platform. So let's go through some adoption. And here, the predictions are that Google Assistant is going to leap ahead in terms of adoption, and Alexa and Siri are also going to stay in the picture. So these are the underlying operating systems that we're going to be looking at. And some of the applications that have taken off right now, most of you would have seen this, how you can order an Uber through Facebook. This is you could expect. Of course, there has to be pizza ordering. But for doing this, you have to first register with the Pizza Hut and others before you can start ordering it. Those are examples. There's a case study I'm writing on Pagayu, which I'll get to in a second. The one that I would like for you, most of you to look at is this growth bot. The reason is, it speaks Slack as a platform around which it works. The other thing is they set the expectations very clearly as to what this thing does. So, for example, right out of the gate, they tell you they use the following data sources: HubSpot, Google Analytics, MailChimp, and social networking sites. You know that that's the underlying data set. And then they give you sample questions to ask and how this thing works. So the expectations are set very early on that it's not to answer every possible question, but limited set. And they also mention in that the personality that they have given this is the CTO's personality, the CTO Dharmesh, who is part of HubSpot. They've adopted his personality for this particular bot. It's very important to have clarity around those as to what is the nature of interaction you're going to have with your market, and then what data source do you depend on. Figure is a case I've written, which is a startup that's looking at how do you use chats for event planning, and also you can arrange transportation while you're at it. So multiple things are being combined. The other one is travel for airline flights. All your financial service firms, they all have these interactions, but these are interactions with your bank accounts and so on. So Bank of America has one, Capital One has one, MasterCard has one, and they've given it names, as you can see. This one was interesting, H&M, where it's not just answering questions about the service that they are providing, but it's also helping you select products. And you can imagine this for many types of products, you can have these kinds of interactions out there. So what's the core idea behind all these? That somehow you make sense of the queries that users are asking. The more narrow the expectation, the higher you could respond effectively. sense making can be done as to what people are asking. And then you can help them make decisions, right? But in order to make those decisions, you need to provide support through expert systems or machine learning techniques and through the various data sources that are available. So AI is not to a point where you can understand every request that's being made. We don't have superpowers yet. I think where AI is right now is applicable is for more narrow intelligence. You can pick one domain and help answer many questions within that domain. Here are the different providers of the AI engine. Okay. How can you start now? So pick a process, pick a platform for development, and that platform should be just like I told you about how do you look at effectiveness of platform? You have to look at adopters, developers, and so on. Then what is the kind of interaction you want to have? What persona should you have for the experience? Build the bot, pilot it, make sure you get to own the domain knowledge, understand what kind of algorithms are there behind it, run it as an experiment. Don't just start by saying, I'm going to adopt this. And also constantly look for innovative users in other settings. And you can do this internally, or you can use third parties to help you with this. So I gave you a couple of examples. You have LogMeIn and V24, companies that can help you with making these choices. What are some risks? Most of you have heard a story about Microsoft Day about unintended consequences of chatbots. There could be regulations very soon on how you can use the data, and security and privacy are also key here. Let me just, for the tail end of it, let me tell you why it is important to consider this seriously, because data is a new competitive weapon. And most businesses, the successful ones, particularly digital titans, have more than one business. For example, Amazon, in addition to retail, has the services business, which is in fact the most profitable one. It's not just Amazon that way. If we take Netflix has a core business, but now it's entering into movie productions because of the data it's collected about user preferences. So this helps them make sure that there are other options open for them. So let me move on and end with the next few. So when you have data, you can, like, if you think Facebook, they would like to explore new opportunities with known partners. Like if they were using that with Zynga, one of their partners, they can use that with them, the game developer. They can use it just internally to come up with new product ideas, or they can open it up for third parties to build applications on top of Facebook. There are different ways of happening that. We went through some of these before about considerations, but the one that you also want to keep in mind is just because there's an algorithm doesn't mean it's okay. Algorithms may have biases hidden in them, and you have to keep a watch out for that. So the question I would like to leave you with is, are these chatbots here to stay? I think the 30% gives you pause because they are not a general purpose engine, but for specific tasks, they've been very effective, but not as general purpose engine. So I agree with the poll here, which still says that no, but there's some who are exploring it. The ones who are exploring it are the ones who apply, hopefully, in a narrow domain. So what are the final takeaways? We shouldn't call them chatbots. We should call them niche chatbots because they apply in narrow domains. Set the expectations very clearly that it works for narrow domains. The important thing is to get at insights from the log files of interactions. At the end, the companies must own the digital experience across many channels. Data, 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 data. All these data that you collect, you can use not only in your own product improvement, but also in participating in other ecosystems, just like what Netflix or Google and others have done. So let me stop with that.
Okay. Thank you, Bala. And we have time for questions, and we have a lot of questions, so let me jump right in. Several of the questions have actually picked up on some of the recent headlines that we've seen involving social networks, and I wanted to. Here's one. Given the recent issues with social network app data, how likely are people to share more of their data in the future? Is this going to be a problem?
That's an excellent question. I think if there are no regulations, right now there are not much regulations on data sharing, but it's going to come very soon, and I've written about this quite a bit. If people see value in the exchange and they trust the brands, I see them sharing the data. But the level at which we are sharing right now, knowingly and unknowingly, is certainly something that will stop. So my expectation is that trusted brands that have been delivering value would continue to collect and would be successful, but it's not going to be what has happened recently with the news, where a third party was able to collect using a starter set of 250 surveys going to 50 million of collecting data of 50 million people. Those kinds of things. By the way, it's through APIs. Some of these things can be regulated.
Does this? Here's another question. Picking up on what you were just saying about the social network problems, what are the risks of using free platforms, and does this argue in favor of having your own platform or being more proprietary?
Yeah, so this is going back to the platform strategy. So regardless of platforms in whichever layer we are talking about, in every layer of the stack that we talked about, a few platforms are going to dominate. And the way you can read about that there are many papers written about and books written about platforms. So if a platform has begun to dominate, it makes no sense to create your own platform. But if there is an opportunity because you're providing some unique core service or idea, then it makes sense for you to develop your own platform. But I think with Messenger and others that are there for the communication and the bot platforms out there, the narrow domain bot platforms are still open. So I don't think, for example, every bank has to reinvent the core platform. They just need to use the existing platforms, but create unique digital experiences around that platform. So they own the experience and not necessarily the platform. But if the platform is not there yet, then it makes sense for them to develop their own.
Okay. Another question that several attendees have raised has to do with this feeling of missing the human connection, and that kind of the sense that they are stressed about losing human interaction. And to what extent are companies developing hybrid systems, bots with humans kind of in the background working together?
See, that's the key point that came out of the survey. Just like for any programmer, you'll know that if certain conditions are not met, there should always be a graceful way for the program to exit. Similarly, in this, for every process that you're thinking about, there must be human intervention. So the service providers, the ones that I listed for you there, like Week24 and LogMeIn and others, they also have help desk services to go with their offering. It's because of that 30% rule that we talked about for general purpose engines. But even for narrow domains, understanding exactly what the customer is looking for can be challenging, and that's why you need an escalation to humans. So I look at this technology as mostly augmenting human intellect rather than substituting humans.
Okay. Another question. For a large company engaging with the public at an early stage, what are the practical first steps that you recommend for the large company to get involved in this area?
I would say experimentation. I think it's if this gets with any other high tech products that we're talking about, the new layers as they emerge, it's very important to do strategic experiments with scope clearly understood, and then with measures in place, and then seeing if for their domain this makes sense. Just because everybody's doing it doesn't necessarily mean there's competitive advantage in it for you, because your customers may not be part of the segment that uses these applications in their daily lives. So in order to test it out, you got to do strategic experiments, and then see what kind of adoption results you get before you launch into a broader scale implementation. And that's where reusing what's out there makes a lot of sense. Because today experimentation costs with technology have gone down because of those services that are already available to reuse that I mentioned in the trends slide.
Okay. The question has to do with, here's a specific question. Why isn't IBM active in this area with Watson?
Watson is part of that engine that drives a lot of these AI. See, part of this whole conversational commerce is the messaging and the AI engine, right? The AI engine, IBM is one of the providers of those engines. So you have to understand the architecture of this whole idea of conversational commerce. The architecture part, a big piece of that is the AI engine that runs behind those, and they're inside there somewhere.
One of the questions that came in is, will we see digital replicas of each of us as individuals?
Yeah, that's the piece that I wrote, I think, 3 months ago, that it's not the market share domination I'm worried about. I'm more worried about what percentage of our information do these digital titans have. That's the digital replica I'm talking about. So once they have that, it'll be easy for them to predict what we need next, and that has some serious implications. Yes, I am worried about that.
Here's one, a question that came up involving, this was one of the, are there examples of disasters you can point to where companies did a poor job designing their interactions?
I think that Microsoft Tay experiment was what comes into that. If you allowed, where they did the training with general data on Twitter feeds, and it went totally out of control. So you may want to read it up in the press. So it is very important how you train. See, there's no avoiding the deep understanding of the architecture behind these experiments. You cannot run it as a black box. So if the learning engines, if we don't understand where the data comes from for the learning part of it, then there are consequences to it. So every aspect, the training data you use, the domain knowledge you get, the AI engines that you're using, it's important to understand the pedigree of those too.
Here's one that just came in. Are chatbots used in B2B, and which types of usage will probably develop in this area in the near term?
Yes, there are examples of B2B also, but I think because of the proclivity for us to get to the consumers first, because it's a lot of the innovations today are coming from there. I think my expectation that the B2C one will lead the way in this one.
Okay. Question involving the healthcare area. Can AI help patients and doctors communicate better? Do you see that?
This is not about chatbots. You're asking in general, does AI help doctors and patients communicate better? Especially if you're using remote expertise of doctors, if they don't speak the language, perhaps this could act as a Rosetta Stone for these exchanges. Maybe that's what the question alludes to. Because AI is also using the data sets to train for disease management and others. There's that aspect of it. The communication aspect, if they're referring to that, yeah, there's a possibility that you can use the language understanding and translation to get patients to understand more what the doctors are saying. Yeah, that's possible.
Okay. There was in your article you referred to an offering from 1-800-Flowers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you could take us through a little bit on how that worked, the mechanics of that, and what it might suggest to other companies.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. In fact, I was looking at that video a month ago where Zuckerberg was pointing out the irony of using a phone number to do messaging. So if you're talking about flowers and you're ordering flowers, it shows up as a link within the conversation, and you can click on that to actually initiate the order. And if the payment information others are already in the messaging platform that you have, it's very seamless for you to get this thing done. But it understands the context of the conversation, and because there's a relationship between the company and, let's say, Messenger, that shows up as a link during a conversation, and you're able to make the order in that. A lot of the related information that you need already there in your phone, and you could use that information, and that's the convenience aspect of it that people are highlighting. So in that example, so during the conversation, you're talking about sending flowers. That's possible to understand. So then you got the natural language engine kicks in and says, perhaps we should now send in the option for them to order it. So it's in context. And then your payment information is available. Hopefully you can look up the person's directory to see if they have the address where the flowers have to be sent. So everything is in context and makes a lot of sense to send this. And that's why it's efficient. So that's a good example of how it should work.
Okay. It seems that people are, several of the questions seem to speak to the idea that people like the convenience, but they worry and kind of stress about losing the human side of the relationship. When do you think we will see bots that can understand context and make decisions that people feel comfortable with?
So we have to be careful about being too human-like, because some experiments have shown that if it is too close to humans, people are repulsed by that, and adoption drops. So that's one we have to worry about. The other thing about, the AI engines we're talking about today, the promise was there for a long time that can understand common sense. But it's not delivered on that yet. That's why it's good to look at it as narrow domain versus broad and general. So for narrow problems, I think it works effectively. But for broader problems, we still will need humans in the loop. So I don't see that completely vanishing. But a good set of problems that we solve every day could be classified under the narrow domain, and I can see those getting substituted. But mostly it's going to be augmentation of human intellect, I see, going forward.
Mm-hmm. I think we probably have time for one or two more questions. Here's one that kind of picks up on what we were just talking about. How do you see the balance between convenience and privacy?
That's the bargain that we are currently facing. How much information are you willing to reveal? I think there was Facebook had at one point an algorithm that could predict if people would get engaged. While that seems like a very interesting app, but we want to live our lives too and find out ourselves rather than an algorithm predicting that. So people are going to, at some point, not give up the ownership of the data, but just like a medical record, allow companies to access it temporarily rather than to give away the ownership, like the one which happened to the recent Facebook Cambridge Analytica experiment where the data was actually downloaded. That you're going to see people are becoming more conscious of that now. And the fact that companies have the ability to build digital replicas of you, I think it's people are beginning to understand that better now. And what are the consequences of that? And then what are some solutions? We still don't have solutions there where we can temporarily allow companies to access this data for one use and then retain control over it after that.
I think we're going to have
to be forgotten should be there.
I think we're going to have to end here. Okay. That concludes the presentation, and that's all we have time for as far as questions. Over the next few days, please look out for a feedback survey we'll send via email. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions. A reminder that the recording will be available within 3 to 4 business days, and that concludes our program. Thank you for attending, and thank you again to our presenter, Bala Iyer, and to our sponsor, Bold 360 by LogMeIn. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.